When you're standing at the altar, heart racing, reciting vows for better or worse, doesn't your brain conveniently skip over the worst part? You're picturing cozy nights and an endless joy, basically all the better. But here's what no one tells you during that magical picture perfect moment at the altar. Those vows aren't just poetic fluff. They're a reminder that the worse is inevitable. And uncomfortable as it may be, that's where the real growth comes in. But here's where it gets trickier. What if the worst doesn't show up as some big dramatic affair, but as something quieter, sneakier, small, subtle? What if it comes in the form of everyday lies? These aren't bold-faced lies you see in the movies or that you've maybe heard from others. No, these are the little lies, the seemingly harmless ones, the ones we tell ourselves, more or less. These are like, this isn't a real problem, or even worse, this doesn't really matter. Spoiler alert, it always matters. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Voyage Cast, where we share stories, insights, and tools to help you thrive beyond the office. I'm Eddie, your host, and today we're tackling a topic that might resonate deeply with many of you: all the little lies in marriage. We'll explore how the dream of happily ever after can slowly shift into the unsettling question, what the hell happened? So let's dive in. Marriage is often described as a beautiful union of two souls, and sometimes it truly does, or truly is. But let's be honest, it's also messy, unglamorous effort between two imperfect people learning how to coexist. As someone who works with couples regularly, I witness this struggle firsthand. My goal is to help uncover the myths we believe about marriage and replace them with more generous, honest truths. Truths that foster understanding, connection, and growth. You see, these little lies creep into our marriage like weeds in a sidewalk. They start small, almost invisible, but given time, they crack the foundation wide open. And before you know it, you're standing there wondering, how did we drift so far apart? Suddenly, you're two people scrolling separately on your phone at 1 a.m. Physically close, but emotionally miles apart. You might be on different continents. I call it poison in the tea. A sip at a time, unnoticed until it's too late. The worst part, these lies disguise themselves as common sense or harmless compromises. They whisper, it's fine, when it isn't. They nudge us towards complacency, frustration, and isolation. Now, here's the good news. You can catch these lies before they metastasize. Embrace yourself for this one. Marriage doesn't have to be perfect to be good. It doesn't require two flawless people. It requires two people willing to put in the work. Real, messy, frustrating, sometimes mostly unglamorous work. Because here's the truth, we often resist. Growth requires discomfort. The easy path might feel safe, but it keeps us trapped, circling the same problems over and over and over again. If we want something more, something purposeful and resilient, we've got to call out those lies disguised as harmless truths, challenge them, replace them, and ultimately guard what we promise to care for. So I had an idea of how maybe we can start learning how to catch these lies. And if you know me, you know that I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. And if you've listened to my other podcast, you know I did kind of a mock Screwtape letter. Well, I'm here to do it again. And for those of you who don't know the Screwtape Letters, here's a brief idea of the premise. This is a genius senior demon mentoring his young nephew on how to tempt humans. It's a clever, convicting, and frankly, pretty uncomfortable insight. So I thought, why not borrow that framework again to highlight how these little lies creep into our marriage? And I think what follows is my humble attempt to channel Screwtape, but you can be the judge of that. Leave your comments for me. I can take it. All right, well, here we go.
My dearest Wormwood, have you noticed how much simpler our work has become? Once we had to tempt, deceive, and twist the patient's heart directly. Now, they do most of the work for us. The culture now sings our song, and they hum along without a second thought. Marriage, once a stronghold of unity and devotion, now crumbles from within, undone by the very people who once vowed to protect it. Your job, my dear nephew, is not to tear down marriage by force. No, you see, that would only awaken their resistance. Instead, keep feeding them little lies, soft enough to be believed, compelling enough to be followed, shrouded in truth. Make them think these thoughts are their own, or better yet, that these thoughts are enlightened truths. Here's some of the most effective lies, or at least the ones that I have found to be effective. The lie of the right person. Teach them that marriage is about finding the one, the perfect soulmate who will complete them effortlessly. If they ever struggle, whisper that they must have chosen the wrong person. If their love fades, assure them it was never real to begin with. Keep them chasing this non-existent person, you know, the one from Unicornia, and they will never plant their roots deep enough to weather any relational storm. The lie of romantic sovereignty. Convince them that love is nothing more than a fleeting feeling, an emotion that comes and goes like the weather. Let them believe that if the feeling fades, then love itself is dead. Whisper to them that marriage should always be effortless, and that any hint of struggle or hardship is a sign of failure, a reason to abandon ship. Above all, keep them blind to the truth that love, real love, is forged in trials, strengthened by commitment, and deepened through sacrifice. But that's detestable, so such truths, my dear, are far too dangerous for them to grasp. Keep them chasing the illusion. Keep them shallow. The lie of personal growth over commitment. Make sure they view their marriage as a stepping stone, not a covenant. Encourage them to believe that they must put their personal growth above their relationship, always asking, is this marriage serving me, rather than how can I serve my marriage? What a detestable thought. If the spouse does not align perfectly with their evolving desires, which of course is impossible, tell them it is time to move on, time to find somebody who can really keep up with them. The lie of unforgiveness. Keep them focused on their spouse's flaws, never their own. Remind them of every slight, every wound, every disappointment. Let them replay their grievances until bitterness takes root. Tell them that forgiveness is weakness, that grace is undeserved. Make them believe that their pain is justified. In fact, it's a part of what makes them, well, them. And of course, to let go of this pain would be to lose themselves and remain unprotected. The lie of hyper-individualism. Convince them that they don't need their spouse, that true strength lies in independence and self-sufficiency. Emphasize that marriage should never require dependence or vulnerability. Keep them distant, even while under the same roof, immersed in their phones, their work, and other distractions, but never fully present with one another. Encourage a sense of moral superiority, assuring them they're on the right path. And if their spouse doesn't understand, frame it as the spouse is failing. Reinforce the idea that they are the one who truly sees what's best. The lie of endless options. Convince them that there's always someone better. Someone who listens more intently, loves more passionately, understands them in ways their spouse never could. Whisper to them of an ideal, a fantasy partner who will fulfill every longing without flaw or frustration. Keep them comparing their real, imperfect partner to the shimmering mirage until dissatisfaction poisons their heart. When disconnect begins to fester, and it will, let them believe it's because they settled, that they were meant for something greater, someone else. Suggest that true happiness lies not in the messy, unglamorous work of nurturing what they have, but in abandoning it to start over. Above all, ensure they never pause to see the truth, that their dissatisfaction is not with their partner, but within themselves, and that it will shadow them no matter whom they choose. Keep their eyes fixed on the fantasy, and their hearts forever restless. Nothing like a good old fantasy to win your patient over. The lie of equality as rivalry. Turn marriage into a battleground of competition. Convince them that fairness is the ultimate virtue, that keeping score is the only way to measure love and commitment. Make them see their spouse not as a teammate, but as an enemy within. If they start to feel they are giving more or sacrificing too much, whisper to them that they are being taken for granted, exploited even. Foster resentment by making every compromise feel like a loss. If their spouse achieves something, make them believe it comes at their own expense. You see, in this game, there are no shared victories, only winners and losers. The lie of being a burden. Make them see relationships not as a delight, but as an endless obligation, a chain wrapped tightly around their precious autonomy. Convince them that commitment is a chain, a thief of freedom, and far too steep a price to pay for investing in another human soul. Convince them that the effort relationships require yields little reward, that true happiness lies in indulgence and pleasure, rather than the laborious nature of love. If they have families, help them to focus on their quiet resentments, the unacknowledged sacrifices that come from nurturing these burdens. Suggest that their careers, social standing, and personal gratification are far more noble pursuits than the invisible, thankless toil of fostering connection or raising children. Besides, it is those at the office that really respect them and see who they really are. Let them believe relationships are a drain, not fountains, burdens, not blessings. Turn their gaze inward until they see others only as obstacles to their own ambitions. In this way, they are much, much more like our Father below. The lie of I shouldn't have to change. This idea of change, the enemy always wants the patients to change and grow. Ridiculous. To stifle any chance of real change, remind the patient that true love, if it exists at all, means being accepted exactly as they are, flaws and all. Not that they have many flaws anyways, of course, just the occasional harmless indulgences and selfishness, which naturally they should reframe as self-care. Whisper to them that it's not a fault to look after themselves. No, it's indeed virtuous. Encourage them to believe that it is their spouse who must change, who must adjust, who must accommodate. And if the spouse resists, well, that's clearly the root of all the conflict in their marriage, isn't it? Convince the patient that this burden lies squarely on their partner's shoulders, not theirs, of course. Encourage them to express this with the utmost empathy. It will make them feel wonderfully righteous as they shift all the blame onto another. Whatever you do, keep personal responsibility out of their minds. The lie of, it's just paper. One very effective way to undermine the institution of marriage is to convince them that it is nothing more than a legal arrangement, a mere piece of paper devoid of any sacred significance or lasting weight. Whisper to them that vows are outdated rituals, simply performative gestures with no binding power. Encourage the belief that these so-called commitments are purely conditional, fragile things tied entirely to their ever-changing feelings. And feelings, of course, are the things that reign supreme over any notion of duty or sacrifice. Instill into them the idea that marriage is temporary, a convenience rather than a covenant. Then when the inevitable trials comes, as they always do, of course, the whole thing will crumble under the weight of their self-interest. There really is nothing more delightful than the slow, steady corrosion of something meant to endure. The lie of unrestricted sexual freedom. You see, in this arena, we are not all that needed. Much of the modern culture has already sowed the seeds we planted long ago. But for good measure, be sure to affirm that every desire is a right, that denying oneself is a form of oppression. Whisper that self-control is certainly outdated, a relic of repressive moral chains, and that monogamy is an impossible ideal for creatures so ruled by such appetites. And my goodness, do these humans have such appetites? Suggest that attraction is action, that to feel is to do, and anything less is a betrayal of the truest self. And the true self is the most important one. Fill their minds with the fear of missing out. Nothing like good FOMO. Paint their loyalty as wastefulness, their restraint as self-denial, and the devotion as dull. Let them believe that true happiness lies just beyond the boundaries of their premises, waiting to be seized if only they dare to break free. And of course, freedom is the highest virtue. And so, my dear Wormwood, let us turn our attention to the matter of love, the most dangerous of human delusions. Above all, convince them that true love should demand nothing from them. Whisper in their ears that duty is a heavy chain meant to stifle freedom, and that commitment without constant gratification is a relic of a primitive age. Ensure they believe that love, if it is real, should flow effortlessly, requiring no effort, no sacrifice, and no endurance. Plant the glorious seed of doubt. If marriage becomes hard, it is surely proof that love has died. And of course, if love is dead, why should they stay? Let them feel not guilt, but entitlement when they walk away. Now, Wormwood, to the art of self-justified abandonment. When they stand on the precipice of leaving, arm them with the tools to rewrite their story. Help them craft a narrative where they are the misunderstood and long-suffering victim, and their spouse the unyielding oppressor, that battle axe. Guide them to magnify petty grievances while silencing the echoes of past joys. Encourage them to harden their hearts to reason and blot out any memory of shared love and promises. If they must leave, see that they do so with a head held high, and righteous indignation, of course, utterly convinced that they are pursuing their own happiness. Above all, ensure they feel virtuous in their abandonment, as though breaking their vows were an act of courage rather than betrayal. How delightful it is, my dear nephew, when a simple whisper can dissolve the bonds of love and leave behind the sweet chaos of broken lives. Press on, for the enemy takes great delight in love endured, and it is our task to unravel it wherever we find it. Our greatest victory is not in forcing them apart, no, but in making them believe they chose it freely. Keep them looking inward. Keep them chasing themselves. And above all, keep them believing that love should never require sacrifice. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
All right, back to reality. While the satire is fun and I do enjoy it, the truth isn't always pretty. The lies we ignore don't die, they grow. And that's why marriage, real, messy, life-giving marriage, requires vigilance. It requires us to fight for connection, to reflect, communicate, and choose truth over convenience. So what should you do? Here's the short list. Be vigilant. Notice when unhealthy beliefs are creeping in. Question them, catch them, identify them, speak truth. Don't passively accept the lies swirling around you. Address them head on. Reality test them together. Seek community. Surround yourself with people who value marriage and commitment. Lean on counselors, mentors, and guides who can help you realign with truth. Look, I understand it. No marriage is perfect, and that's not the goal here. Perfection is another myth and a lie. But two imperfect people committing to doing the work can build something beautiful, something worth fighting for, something worth keeping. Real love, messy, selfless, and built on truth, endures when everything else fades away. Well, that's all for today, folks. Remember, love isn't disposable. Even when the world tries to convince you otherwise, it's sacred, and it's worth protecting. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Voyage Cast. If you found any value in today's episode, please share it with your friends or family and leave a 5-star review. It does help with those algorithms. And if you're really generous, you can always join us on Patreon. Until next time, keep building, keep loving, and keep choosing truth one day at a time.